Thank you so much for that introduction and for inviting me to also share my perspective on the relevance of basic sciences to sustainable development. The title of my presentation for this morning is on addressing this conundrum, which is planet Earth, and what's its maximum carrying capacity, given the fact that and the previous presenters, Prof. Bruton, as well as Dr. Robinson, indicated that we've exceeded our planetary boundaries. So planet Earth definitely has a maximum carrying capacity, and there are projections of when we will receive or reach this maximum carrying capacity. And as a result of that, I mean, our business as usual activities definitely impact on how we should be proceeding in the coming years. Just moving on to the significance or the relationship between the basic or natural sciences, and as I've indicated, physical and biological sciences being the discipline whose primary function is basically on generating knowledge, and this comes through observing natural phenomena. And this is what Prof. Bruton also mentioned in his earlier slides of his presentation. So this basically creates this foundational knowledge that we require, and usually with the applied disciplines, they take up the basic information, which then is quite relevant to how do we apply it in terms of, for example, biotechnology, microbiology, etc., being the applied sciences or disciplines for that matter. The long and short of the story is that credit needs to be given to the basic sciences in generating this new knowledge, at different times when we are reliant on it. Now, moving on to the sustainable development perspective, ideally, this is what was proposed. We have this quite a nice balance, and this was based on the pre-industrial period, where the amount of carbon emissions per annum was calculated at 280 parts per million. And the temperature on average, with regard to the temperature increase, the global average was sitting on less than 1 degree Celsius. So sustainable development actually happens where we have the intersection or intersecting in this Venn diagram of economic, social, as well as environmental imperatives of sustainable development. But this is the ideal. And this happened a long time ago, if I could put it that way, because we've compromised many of the planetary boundaries, which was also mentioned by the previous speakers. So looking at how does sustainable development, climate change, and the basic sciences actually intersect? We've known for some time that anthropogenic activities have had a significant impact on Earth systems. And just to mention a few, the hydrological system, the ecosystems, the biosphere, as well as our biodiversity loss and the impact of emissions in altering atmospheric gases or even composition thereof. And global warming has been known for quite some time now. So the term that has been coined informally to date has been, we are in an Anthropocenic era or period. It hasn't been formally accepted, and I think it's because human beings are responsible for the changes that we're seeing currently. Now, with the altering of Earth systems, what we can relate to directly has been the recent erratic weather patterns, the impact on carbon sinks as a result of the reef, for example, and then exceeding the planetary boundaries. And I will actually spend some time just reflecting on it as well. But the implications are that we need to rethink our existing body of knowledge, especially the basic knowledge that has been put in place by the basic sciences, because now it's human activity that is actually influencing these natural systems, which we have come to know over the centuries. Now, on planetary boundaries, we have identified that there are 9 planetary boundaries, and we need to be cognizant of the fact that this approach is also being quite widely criticized because of the manner in which the exceeding of each of these planetary boundaries have been considered by each country in that regard. The first four that have been highlighted in green, climate change, biodiversity, integrity loss, as well as the altered biogeochemical cycles and land system use, or land system change for that matter, are the four that we've exceeded already. And just 3 or 4 years ago, we were actually sitting on 3 of the planetary boundaries that we exceeded, not only for South Africa, but globally as well. But now this is what the latest information with regard to the planetary boundaries is indicating. So in essence, we come back with how is it that we're able to actually reverse these processes? And many of these processes cannot be reversed, but we can slow down this impact that we're having on the planet itself. And these global agreements, which I've listed at the bottom, the Montreal Protocol, the Paris Agreement, as well as the Convention on Biological Diversity, forces countries globally to then agree to certain terms and conditions, which would actually ensure that we are moving in on this trajectory that will slow down the impact that we've had thus far on the planet itself. And I want to propose the Venn diagram that you see on your screen now. This has been South Africa's position in approaching sustainable development. Governance sits at the base of it, and everything that happens obviously happens within the environment. So the earlier Venn diagram that you would have recalled is definitely different in approach in comparison to this. And this is exactly what is happening. Whilst the economic pillar of sustainability sits in the smallest circle, it actually has a greater impact on the social as well as the environmental imperatives. And just reflecting on the temperature, global drive to maintain global temperatures to less than 2 degrees Celsius is actually something that may not necessarily be achieved if we have rapid industrialization in the coming decades. So we need to understand what is our actual safe operating space, given the fact that we've compromised 4 of these 9 planetary boundaries, which I mentioned earlier on. And that being said, I mean, if you reflect on the IPCC reports, that's the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, ever so often undertaking these observations across both the global north as well as the global south, and coming up with potential recommendations that should be followed by countries quite diligently and quite closely as a result of anthropogenic activities. The basis for this impact, as I indicated earlier on, is on anthropogenic activities, which is widely spread. And we have developing countries as well as emerging economies wanting to industrialize at a pace that planet Earth is not able to absorb. And as a result of that, this global challenge that we are faced with currently, being climate change, becomes everyone's business, because we've got to change the way in which we behave. We've got to change the manner in which personal monetary gains as well as material gains should be put to the backseat, and people need to realize, for the greater good or for the greater public good, the environmental aspects that have been compromised as a result of it. And that being environmental degradation, natural resource depletion, as well as managing waste, which is generated through human behavior and activities. Now, one key difference between climate change and sustainable development is that climate change identifies the social as well as the environmental imperatives, whereas with sustainable development, it traverses the social, environmental, as well as the economic imperatives. And this is one of the clear distinctions that we see between the both. So how is it that we are supposed to actually approach this conundrum? And currently, actually, I just Googled this information. We will reach the 8 billion mark with regard to the global population by the 15th of November this year. And it's also projected that by 2050, we'd be sitting on the 10.4 billion mark. Now, according to the maximum carrying capacity of planet Earth, we're sitting at between 9 to 10 billion. And actually by 2050, it seems like we would have exceeded this maximum carrying capacity. Now, reaching that maximum carrying capacity cannot determine, well, we can have projections, we can have some systems modeling taking place, but at the end of the day, we are not necessarily 100% sure of the impact that reaching or exceeding this maximum carrying capacity from a human population perspective, what would be the dynamics on Earth systems? And this is definitely cause for concern. For the past 15 to 20 years, the talk has been on sustainable development, resource efficiency, low carbon development. And for many, it seems to have fallen on deaf ears and has not necessarily seen proactive traction being gained around addressing these desperate calls for us to change our behavior itself at the end of the day. I think the worrying point is that some of the key issues or events that actually take place are irreversible. And I provided the examples of melting of the polar ice caps, for example, and a subsequent increase in sea level rise. And many of these cities are experiencing it. So if you look at islands, small island states, they're definitely concerned about it, looking at natural barriers that could protect them, obviously transitioning to low carbon imperatives and embracing it from an industrial perspective as well. But over and above that, cities which are famously known, such as New York and Venice, for example, these are now known as sinking cities as a result of the sea level rise. And then biodiversity loss, I mean, species extinction seems to be happening so often recently. South Africa itself has a rare data species list. So it's definitely quite concerning, given that Africa seems to be the last hope for the planet itself in terms of transitioning from being known as a dark continent to actually providing hope for the rest of the world. So what does it require for us to do in order to firstly sustain life on Earth? And secondly, what are the key measures that we need to put in place to firstly slow down what has been happening over the past decades, but over and above that, changing behavior? So much of the damage that has been done, and if you have to reflect on the industrialization of the developed countries in that regard, it's placed us in this current situation. And on a political level or on a negotiations level, developing versus developed countries, the key issue here has been that developing or emerging economies are still being industrialized. They still need to get to where developed countries have reached in order to determine their economies as well. But the compromising point here is, how is it that developing countries or emerging economies actually proceed? How do we undertake this industrialization in a responsible manner? So that's the key issue here. And SDG 17, if the audience is familiar with the 17 SDGs, it talks to collaboration, it talks to technology transfer, innovation, as well as the means of implementation. So, how is it that we will actually be able to ensure that we remain within the limits to ensure that we do not exceed the maximum carrying capacity for planet Earth? I'm not sure whether we could level the playing field, given that we've compromised on 4 of the 9 planetary boundaries. Should it be an approach that we actually embrace, which is going down to basics and looking at it from a sustenance perspective? So using a very conservative approach as we move forward. And then, does planet Earth actually have a fighting chance, given the impact that human consumptive and productive patterns have had in the recent decades? But we are actually in control of human behavior. And given the fact that we've placed ourselves in the situation, we should be able to also get ourselves out of the situation. So the key issue here is sustainable development in addressing the environmental, social, as well as the environmental, the economic imperatives. Is it then the silver bullet? Is it providing us with the solution that we need to actually take with speed? So, in reflecting on this conundrum that we find ourselves in, these are some of the, I could say, takeaways that I'm providing. The first one is that it's definitely going to have to be a multidisciplinary approach. We can't be sitting in and working in silos in order to address the issue. The social sciences, for example, at university level or tertiary institution level, has come to the fore in informing the climate change space and how we should be proceeding. The second key one that stands out, and this is in the Paris Agreement as well, common but differentiated responsibilities. So what is it that we can do as developing countries, as emerging economies, and ensure that what we are doing at the end of the day in advancing our economies, in industrializing our economies and our countries, in providing for a certain lifestyle, that we are not necessarily doing it in an irresponsible manner. And the means of implementation at the time, way back in 2009, 2010, was proposed as pursuing a green economy agenda. Of recent, it's been about moving from linear to circular economy models of implementation, or the positioning of resource efficiency from a sustainable consumption and productive pattern, and that in a manner requires for product design, we basically working waste out of the system before it even materializes. And whilst we generate these new bodies of knowledge, the key thing here is its applicability. It shouldn't be something that sits on the shelf until we realize, okay, actually, we figured this out 15 years ago, but we didn't do anything about it. So we need to be very realistic in approach on what we can do and what we can't do. We need to ensure that, as I've indicated earlier on, we follow through responsibly, ensure that we are resource efficient, and that industrialization is undertaken in a responsible manner. So sustainable development definitely ticks these boxes as a response that we could follow. However, there are certain challenges, and the unit in which I work in, we tend to coordinate green economy interventions across the different sectors. However, many of these interventions have been at demonstration level. And the challenge that we've been faced with is it's not happening fast enough. It's not happening at scale. And we don't necessarily have the human resources capacitated to actually take on these new and emerging industries to ensure that technology transfer from developed to developing countries happens smoothly and seamlessly, and to provide that enabling environment for homegrown innovation and technology. We had insight into some of the homegrown technologies, which Professor Barutin indicated in his presentation. So the means of implementation actually has to happen at scale if we are actually going to ensure that as we proceed and ensure that our planetary boundaries, the remaining 5, are not compromised, that it's happening responsibly. And then one of the key sticking points has been on access to finances. And this has been an ongoing debate on the global platform regarding the responsibilities of developed countries to developing countries. So it's not necessarily payback with interest, but it's about ensuring that we're able to go down this path as a collective and do what is necessary to ensure that planet Earth is actually able to be left behind for future generations as well, to a certain extent intact, noting that we can't reverse some of these changes that we've actually influenced through our existence. So the key message here is on acting with speed, and I would stop here. Thank you.
I'm so glad that people with insight like you are at the department. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about this access to finance problem. I mean, there's supposed to be a climate fund, but the last I heard, it isn't really working. It isn't really full.
Yeah, thanks for that. So it's been an ongoing debate, as I indicated earlier on. The agreement at the global level, or the global platform, which is the UNFCCC COP negotiations, which happens on an annual basis, has ensured that the Paris Agreement accommodates for it. However, with regard to the funds actually becoming available, it's taken some time to actually reach the first 100 billion US dollars. And as a result, the trickling down effect to least developed countries, small island states, as well as developing economies is taking much longer than necessary. And I'm not sure whether these targets are actually going to be achieved by developed countries at the end of the day. So it's an ongoing debate, but nonetheless, other financing mechanisms have definitely come to light, where the position has been that, developed countries feel that developing countries should also take a certain amount of responsibility on and be able to inform the necessary climate resilience development that needs to happen within their countries by themselves. It's a huge task ahead. For example, within the unit, we've been working with municipalities, incapacitating them around green bonds, ensuring that they could actually open themselves up to taking on loans and also follow a green trajectory when it comes to development at the municipal level as well. It's definitely a long road ahead. Nonetheless, we are persevering, and the National Treasury already has an enabling policy environment to ensure that municipalities could actually take up and issue green bonds. We've had 2 cities already in South Africa who've issued green bonds, and it's the city of Joburg as well as the city of Cape Town. It just brings in an additional dimension in regard to monitoring and evaluation, ensuring that the projects that are being proposed under green bond issuance are actually talking to green initiatives. And then over and above that, it also helps municipalities to tighten up on their finance management as well as their governance. So it becomes a kind of win-win situation for municipalities. And then investors are definitely looking for things like this. In South Africa, if you have to go back to the history of those municipal issuances in 2014 and 2017, there was a huge demand for it. And it actually, it's about ensuring that, cities are equally capacitated to undertake bond issuance at their level. So that's one of the ways of addressing the financial needs on the ground. But over and above that, you also have a lot of concessional loans. And of recent, Germany also announced doubling up its contribution for the Just Energy Transition Program for South Africa, along with 4 other countries that have been supporting the program. But it's a facility that's being provided. It does provide a certain amount or a certain percentage of the funds, which can be allocated to technical assistance, et cetera, and feasibility studies. But the bulk of it requires for that transition to happen to actually ensure that we are well on our way with renewable energy, generation, as well as energy security for the country itself. It means that South Africa has to undertake this journey by taking on loans. Now, if you look at foreign currency, the one challenge of it is debt in the medium to long term, and servicing of it becomes too expensive. So we need to find solutions that works for the country within the current environment. Given the recent announcement by the Minister of Finance on our economic outlook, it definitely doesn't leave room for taking on or exploring the option of taking on additional debt and trying to service it as well.
Yes. Yes, indeed. Okay, someone doesn't have their microphone muted, and
Well,
Jenitha has disappeared, or are you just muted? Oh, there you are. You're muted, Jenitha. There we go. Yes, I can see and hear you now. Okay, any questions for Jenitha? There are there's something in the chat. Let me just have a look. Susan Cohn says, good day. Can we contact the speaker on the platform interested in the presentation and solutions? The question is how and when, especially for rural communities. Well, the presentation will be available on our website, I think, Jenitha. Okay.
Yes, definitely. And I have provided my contact details on the presentation as well. So I definitely welcome a side discussion. But just to respond, whilst the rural communities, from an agricultural perspective, we have looked into it. We have developed a guideline through one of the programs on climate smart agriculture. But over and above that, we've also worked with subsistence farmers in 7 of the 9 provinces at a pilot level, looking to ensure that their commodities have access to markets and ensuring that, it could be organic in nature, that they are actually producing the commodities and providing them with the opportunity that's required. There are obviously challenges within the rural communities itself, and I definitely don't have all of the solutions at the moment, but from an agricultural perspective, that's the amount of work that we've undertaken over and above a recent dialogue that we had online, I think just over a year ago, on the potential for agricultural commodities from an export perspective and looking at it as organically grown commodities still being relevant for the export market. It doesn't necessarily help the situation where we have imposing of certain rules and regulations as well, which was recently in the media from the EU asking for the coal value chain to be addressed right from the farm gate until it hits the shelves in Europe. So it brings on an additional expenditure line, which many of the commercial farmers, for example, may not have envisaged.
Right. Mike Bruton?
Thank you. I'd like to ask Jenitha about the calculation of the carrying capacity of the planet. And obviously the number of people is the sort of crudest measure of that, because it's not just the number of people, but how long they live, the extent to which they use resources, the extent to which they have a large or small carbon footprint and so on. Could you comment on how that that carrying capacity is estimated?
But from experience that we've had recently on working on systems modeling regarding economic projections for South Africa itself, the modeling for the carrying capacity of the planet is definitely based on similar systems modeling. I definitely agree with you. I don't have the details of it, but I definitely agree with you that there are going to be other side variables that would influence whether the maximum of between 9 to 10 billion people on the planet is something that can be accommodated. I think that it would be taking into consideration the fact that people would have transitioned to ecological footprints or carbon footprints that are much smaller in comparison to the current ones that have been tracked. I think in Europe, recently it was announced that many of the European countries had timelines attached to it for this year as to where they would have reached their maximum carbon footprints for each of the countries. So it's definitely projections, but it probably would be informed by this transition to a low carbon society at the end of the day, or by 2050 at least, we would have influenced that aspect of it. Thanks.
Thank you. And thanks, Mike, for that question. Okay. We are a little bit over time, but that's fine. Thank you very much, Dr. Badul, for your presentation. It certainly gives me hope when I get confirmation that there are thinkers and knowledgeable people in our government. It's not I know it's a tightrope. I know it's not an easy position to be in. I mean, I think you need a model for just coping in government and with South Africa.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to take that tongue in cheek, but there are many like me within the public sector who have actually done some excellent work. And yeah, we hope to encourage others to join the public sector to ensure that we can still carry on with the good work that comes out of government. I know that the negatives definitely overshadow the good work, but at the end of the day, there's still hope, and we need to work as a collective, you know, and not just focus on a specific sector that needs to deliver on issues. Thanks.
Yes.